going back to Psalm 82, verse 6, I said, that's Elohim, Yahweh, says, "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince." So, on face value, um, there's two things going on, and this is where some of the confusion comes from, because he says, "You are gods, you are Elohim, sons of the Most High, but like men you should die." And if we're already talking about Elohim, do you need to tell them they are Elohim? Like, people kind of question that. If you're talking to human rulers and you're telling them that they're sons of the Most High, well, that kind of makes sense. But if they're already men, then why do you need to tell them, "Like men you shall die"? Right. So that doesn't make sense. I also think this is where our use of the word God gets a little confusing, because it doesn't represent, um, it doesn't, yeah. We tend to put things in that category, like Jesus, who is, ascended, like Yahweh, Most High. But Elohim, like we said before, it can cover a lot of stuff. It covers angels and other spirits and that sort of thing. So if we consider that, where Elohim can be just a wide range of spiritual beings, then you're getting kind of both, that they're elevated to "you are God, sons of the Most High," but also like men you should die. And I think that's a better explanation that is actually rooted in the text and the original meaning. But if you fast forward to where Jesus uses it, it's in John, and he's talking to the Jewish rulers, and they have this place, and they kind of think that it's all going to be okay because of the promises of God for the nation. Jesus can still say, "You are gods." They're given authority. Your sons of the Most High. That was the Davidic covenant that they're trying to enforce. But nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Like, you're fallible too, because you messed this up. You haven't been treating Israel properly, Judea, right? Right. They were judging unjustly. They were showing partiality to the wicked. There was a ton of politics, so they're gonna fall too. And we see that play out, I think, AD 70, fall of the temple, and everything that happened afterwards, right? So, in that sense, I think if we actually think of it as a function, where in some senses, for, I guess if we use New Testament terms just to clarify what Jesus is saying, for the Gentile nations, there is a spiritual being who is guiding them. And this applies to them because they've been unjust. For the nation of Israel, later Judea, at the time of Christ, it would be the Jewish leaders, who have been given this responsibility way back in Exodus, and they're trying to carry it forward, but they failed at it too, so they're going to suffer the same judgment. And I think this all comes about, really, Psalm 81 is a cry for help. The writer there is saying, things are terrible, God. When's it going to be right? When are, we're suffering all this sort of stuff. And Israel would have cried that at the time of the exile. It was because of their own sin, but they were also hoping for justice and the faithful promises of God. And then you get it again in the New Testament. They're under Roman occupation. Their country is split up. A bunch of people are still in exile. They can't worship the way they want, really. They're hoping for the restoration, for the Messiah to come. But the leaders have also been unfaithful. So the whole thing, to me, goes together. And that's why I think the psalmist ends it this way. It's the hope of, God, will you make things right? God, will you put things in order for what we believe, for who you are, justice and righteousness, not just the criminal part that we like to talk about a lot, but there's this restorative part of putting things in the right place, having people treated properly, fulfilling the image of God. And so then that's where we get, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." And we see that in Christ. I think my pastor this morning read from First Corinthians 14, 15, sorry, and eventually everything would be put under the feet of Jesus Christ. That, to me, that is the fulfillment of the psalm. So, yeah.
Very nice. Okay, since you did your part of 6, 7, which I think are maybe the crucial parts of this short chapter, let me read what Golden Gate says about 6:7. Realizing the morally incompetent way the gods are governing the world has made the suppliant realize that they cannot be offspring of the Most High, and that in two senses. It cannot be so because surely they would then show more of a family resemblance. God does not tolerate the neglect or oppression of the poor, so how can God's offspring collude with it? But also, it cannot be so because the suppliant knows that God will take same action against the gods as God takes against human oppressors. God puts them down. They will lose their lives. And if that is a possibility, this too shows that they cannot really be God's offspring. They do not share in God's eternity. The psalm thus compares with the Middle Eastern stories in which gods can both come into being and be killed. Alan Ross says, as discussed earlier, the word gods may have reference to the idea that angelic beings were assigned to each nation. But that would not rule out the reference to human judges here as well. The psalm uses language that would immediately suggest it is directed to supernatural beings or pagan deities, with the intent to include their human agents, to show that God's sovereign commission was all encompassing. In spite of their lofty position or their claims to have supernatural status, God says that they will die like humans. Stripped of their standing, these judges will be revealed to have mortality, something gods should not have. The verse may simply say that they will die like men, but it is possible to read it that they will die like Adam, making a specific reference to the account of the pronouncement of death of the first human who wanted to be like God, Genesis 2 and 3. For their perversion of justice and subversion of society, the human judges are hereby condemned to death, and the spirit beings behind them, originally entrusted with justice on the earth, will die like the corrupt human judges they control. Lastly, John Walton, very shortly. God speaks here through the words of a temple prophet. He's rendering a verdict of destruction on the heavenly beings who have transgressed the divinely ordained social order. An important aspect of the ancient viewpoint here is that human rulers make decisions that mirror the actions of the gods. The term gods is used both of supernatural beings and human rulers as their agents. Therefore, divine retribution reaches into both the human and the heavenly realms in order to vindicate the victims of injustice and oppression.
Again, a lot of commentators, a lot of people looking at this passage, they want to pick this apart and kind of pick either human things or divine things. I think it's a both and that's even the cultural context. He touched on it there, but I suppose we can say something more. In the ancient world, most kings believed that they were either the sons of God or an embodiment of a god as well, right? So we want to separate it, and God in the heaven and people down here and rulers. At least in the ancient world, that line was blurred a lot more. I suppose we could speculate on what really happened. Um, I'm thinking back to talking about the Babylonian religion and how many sexual fertility rituals they had that blurred those lines and drew spiritual items into the birth of new kings. What's really happening there may be a little bit difficult to say, but I would posit that at least from a writer's standpoint, a lived cultural experience is that you can have a divine component, a spiritual component, and a human component active at the same time. It might confuse us a little bit, but I don't think we have to pick an either or. It's a little bit more of a both and then the justice, the judgment can apply to both sides. And the flip side of that, the implication is that this council, to a point where God holds judgment. Um, well, Psalm 89 will complicate this a little bit because it talks about the heavens more explicitly. But at least at some point, it's going to involve both human and divine. elements. And yeah, talk about verse 8, and I've got one more comment after that, and we can move